Why are some people gay? Is there any scientific explanation? There are gays across the animal kingdom. There's a theory that it may be an evolution to limit herd population from overwhelming available resources. Populations of animals that grow too large can experience a catastrophic collapse. There is some evidence to show that groups of animals who experience a population boom also see an increase in gay non-reproducing offspring. My brother is gay. I asked him why specifically for you. He said it's because he likes dick. I don't know how scientific that is, but there you go. There's speculation, but nobody knows for sure. It's believed it is genetic, although there's not a single gene that determines it, but likely many different genes that influence sexual attraction, which could explain why sexual attraction, like so many other things, is more of a spectrum than just a this or that thing. Straight here, but my assumption is that maybe there is some type of genetic predisposition and some social influence. But I don't know and really don't care. I try my best to live and let live. There's a hypothesis called the gay uncle hypothesis. Basically, a man shares half his genes with his brother. In times where child-rearing was particularly taxing, it could help child's survival to have a higher ratio of adults caring for children than each adult having to care for his own children, where they all might be likely to die due to the difficulty of providing for them. Thus, an uncle helps raise his brother's children, and thus 14 of his own genes are passed down to all of his brother's kids. This is difficult to demonstrate, but it does provide a sensible explanation for an evolutionary purpose for homosexuality, where reproduction is concerned. During human development in the womb, we start out with a single pair of sex organs. During development, they become either testes or ovaries, and the rest of the sex organs develop. A lot can happen during that transition that can lead to patterns in the brain that can lead to the expression of sexual preference. It is biological. People are who they are. We should accept that. BTW, this is all my opinion. Yes, there are scientific explanations, but most are speculative. I don't think any have been rigorously tested with the scientific method. Udile Tante has a much better response than mine, but one thing I do like to point out is that humans, and all animals aren't built from the ground up. We can't look at every little thing and say aha. That makes perfect sense why Yao do that. A lot of it is kind of gradual, almost accidental in a way. A famous one is that our lower backs aren't ideally built, they have a lot of flaws. But the advantages of walking upright outweigh the disadvantages of having frequent back issues. So you can never say what's the advantage to that lower back design, because there is no advantage until you combine it with other factors. So homosexuality could be like any number of non-obvious traits. It could have come along with any number of other positive things. Perhaps some survival trait that helps us also comes with an increased chance of being gay. In which case, there's no evolutionary bonus to being gay, but there's a bonus to being disease-resistant perhaps, and the two are linked somehow. Personally, I think the gay uncle theory makes the most sense though. That it's a possible big advantage from a group perspective. Yeah, I found this explanation helpful. More about genders though. HTTPS. Yes, there are several scientific theories that suggest sexual orientation, including being gay, is influenced by a combination of genetic, hormonal, and environmental factors. Research indicates that genetics may play a role, with studies showing a higher likelihood of homosexuality among identical twins. Additionally, prenatal hormone exposure is thought to affect brain development in ways that influence sexual orientation. Ultimately, sexual orientation is complex and likely arises from a unique interplay of biological and social factors, rather than a single cause. I listened to a podcast years ago that theorized that evolutionarily, groups that randomly have LGBT orientations in them do better as a community because it would be an adult with few if any children to raise on their own and thus help with more of the child rearing and communal activities. So it benefits a clan or group to have gay people on the plains of hundreds of thousands of years ago, and thus became an evolutionary trait. There's no way of proving this hypothesis that I know of, and I can't find any sources, so believe at your own discretion. Just going by what I heard. Sexual orientation, like being gay, seems to come from a mix of biology, genetics, and the environment. While sex is tied to reproduction, humans aren't just driven by that, we also crave emotional connection and intimacy, which aren't about having kids. Some scientists believe diversity in sexual orientation could even help build stronger social bonds within communities, which might have been helpful for survival in the past. So, it's not just about biology, but about the complexity of human relationships and how we're all wired a bit differently. Assume we didn't have sexual dimorphism. We'd all have relationships still, but we'd have no preference for one that could include reproduction. There would be about half as many kids. Sexual dimorphism is a way to improve those odds. But it's also more complex. We now need three things to covariate. Each person needs to 1. Have clear sexual traits, clear enough that every observer can identify the sex of the person, 2. Have a sexual identity matching their sex, and 3. Have a clear sexual preference for the other sex. Genetically, this is a big deal, but the payoff is far more kids. But we're discussing biology. Nothing in biology is ever 100. There will be those with traits from the other sex, and those with few clear sexual traits. There will be those with a sexual identity from the other sex, and those with no clear sexual identity. There will be those with sexual preference for the same sex, and those with no clear sexual preference. All told, these groups together make up perhaps 5 or so. Evolutionarily, that's a rounding error, and the system is still selected for, because it still makes the other 95 vastly more fertile. I don't see why we need more in the way of explanation. Homosexuality is an expression of our sexual dimorphism. Some theories are that it could help with population control, or that orphaned young can be adopted by surrogates who obviously don't have to worry about caring for their own biological offspring. I've also read articles that indicate that the biological sisters of gay men tend to have higher fertility than average. Not that being a gay man causes higher fertility in his sisters, it just may be a neutral side effect. Don't take my word for it, I'm not an expert. Otherwise it could just be a neutral phenomenon. It doesn't have to serve a purpose. Red hair or thin lips don't serve a purpose, but evolution didn't weed it out because it didn't affect the continuation of the species. Or gay people are just fabulous and fun. Someone needed to tell me that yellow looks terrible on me and recommend I wear more jewel tones. I never would have known otherwise. We know for sure that your chances of being gay statistically rise the more older siblings you have. My theory is that gays act as augmented resources for the parents. The initial children reproduce and guarantee continuation of the genes. Subsequent gay children do not reproduce, and therefore do not have offspring they need to invest their resources into. So instead, these resources are invested into their siblings' children, enhancing their chances for survival and passing along gay genes in their common gene pool that work the same way for the next generation. So if people have few children, they are more likely to reproduce and have a chance at continuing the line. But if there are surplus children, they function as additional resources for the existing offspring. On a societal level, having gay children means the society has disposable soldiers, people who can defend the society, but whose death will not impact the replenishment of the population afterwards. The gay men defend the core of females and breeding males. If you are at war, or defending against predators, you do not want to sacrifice your breeding males first. Why do some people have bad eyesight, or are left-handed, or have overbites, or have ear lobes that are attached vs detached? There are lots of things that make us different from others that have a genetic component. But just because there is a genetic component doesn't necessarily mean there is an evolutionary explanation for it. Not that there couldn't be, but lots of genetic mutations are pretty random. While there is no identified genetic component, there may be genetic components that affect how people respond to life experiences. What I'm about to say does not go over well when I say it, but the implications about how we provide for people's mental health are serious, so I'd advise looking into it yourself if you're out to prove or disprove anything. Studies that have tracked broad sexuality data have found a tremendously high correlation between being gay or lesbian and having experienced sexual abuse in youth from a man. Not 100, but much higher than the general population. Sexual abuse from a woman seems to be statistically significant, but makes a minor difference. I don't have access to dig up a citation in short enough time that a Reddit post is worth. But if I linked a study, plenty of people would focus on picking it apart rather than being objective. Consider with compassion your gay friends and family members. It's how the brain is wired. There are other gay animals. Best hypothesis we have so far is that it just happens, sometimes brains are complex. Despite more or less all well-studied species having homosexual individuals, homosexuality itself doesn't happen frequently enough to impact a species' fitness. A. Genetics.